A bleeding 9-year-old walked up to a billionaire and said one sentence that froze the room. "Dad, he has the same brand as us." When 9-year-old Eli Mercer walked into the private underground parking level, beneath the Halvorsen Tower, everything stopped. Not the way things stop when alarms blare or engines fail, but the kind of stop that happens when instinct overrides routine, when bodies pause before minds catch up. The garage was polished to a quiet shine, concrete floors reflecting the soft white lines of recessed lights. Blacked-out SUVs sat in precise rows, engines cooling, doors already closing. The air smelled faintly of oil, ozone, and money, filtered, controlled, intentional. Children didn't come down here, and yet there he was. Ellie's left sneaker dragged slightly as he walked. The rubber sole made a thin, wet squeak with every step. A sound small for the space, but impossible to ignore. Blood ran down his shin in a slow, stubborn line, darkening the fabric of a sock that had been washed so many times it had forgotten how to be white. The cut wasn't fresh enough to gush, but not old enough to stop hurting. Every movement reminded him of it. He didn't cry. That was the first thing anyone noticed. Security reacted on instinct. One man straightened. Another took half a step forward. A hand lifted toward a radio clipped neatly at a belt. "Sir," someone began. But the boy didn't look at them. He didn't look at the cars, or the cameras tucked into corners, or the man whose shoes alone probably cost more than his entire backpack. He looked straight ahead, at Daniel Halvorsen. Daniel had been mid-sentence, jacket unbuttoned, phone still warm in his hand. He'd been talking numbers, always numbers, his voice calm, practiced, untouchable. The kind of voice that lived above consequences. It cut off the moment their eyes met. The boy's gaze didn't waver. It wasn't pleading. It wasn't afraid. It was searching, focused in the way only children can be when they don't yet know how to disguise urgency. Eli stopped a few feet away. Up close, the damage was clearer. A bruise darkened the skin beneath one eye, purple already edging toward yellow. Dry dirt streaked his knee. His backpack strap was torn, knotted clumsily back together. He swallowed once, then he spoke. His voice was small, but steady, clear enough to carry. "Dad, he has the same brand as us." The word echoed strangely in the open space. "Dad." For a fraction of a second, no one moved. The garage seemed to inhale. Daniel didn't understand at first. His brow creased, not in anger, not yet in concern, but in confusion, the kind reserved for situations that don't belong to your life. He glanced instinctively over his shoulder, half expecting someone else to be standing there. Someone. This sentence made sense, for no one was. The boy lifted his wrist. That's when Daniel saw it. A thin leather band circled the child's arm, the leather cracked and softened by years of wear. It had been repaired more than once, thread mismatched, holes stretched, but the mark burned into it was unmistakable. A symbol, simple, stark, a brand. Daniel's breath caught, slowly almost. Without realizing he was doing it, he pulled back the cuff of his tailored sleeve. The same band rested against his skin, newer, better cared for, but identical. For the first time in years, Daniel Halvorsen forgot where he was, forgot the guards, forgot the cameras, forgot the weight of his own name. Something old stirred, something he'd buried beneath acquisitions and silence and distance, something unfinished. The boy watched his face carefully, as if reading it for permission to hope. And in that suspended moment between a child bleeding unpolished concrete and a man who had everything but this, the past cracked open. Not loudly, not cleanly, but enough to change. What came next? This was a place where rules existed for a reason. They were written into architecture before they were ever spoken aloud. Private elevators that didn't stop unless summoned. Key cards that logged every second of access. Cameras recessed in the corners, their lenses dark and indifferent, never blinking, never forgetting. The garage was not meant to be welcoming. It was meant to be secure. People didn't wander into spaces like this. Not by accident. Not without clearance. Even mistakes here had to be expensive. And children, especially children, did not belong. Yet Eli stood there anyway. He made the space feel suddenly smaller, as if the concrete had leaned in to watch him. Too thin for 9. His shoulders hunched, not from fear, but from habit. The backpack hanging from one arm pulled him slightly off balance, the zipper broken. The fabric faded in patches that told quiet stories of repetition and repair. His eyes didn't roam the way curious kids' eyes did. They tracked. Exits first, corners next, hands last. That was the second thing the man noticed. There were 6 of them now. 2 security guards near the entrance, weight shifted forward, already calculating angles. A driver by the closest SUV, door half open, an assistant frozen mid-step, tablet held uselessly at her side. Another man pretending not to look at the boy while looking at nothing else. And Daniel Halvorsen stood apart without meaning to. He didn't move toward the child. He didn't step back. His posture was composed. Deliberate, trained over decades to suggest control even when certainty wavered. But something had changed. A guard cleared his throat. Quietly, "Sir, this isn't safe." The words were careful, respectful, not quite a question. Another voice, lower. "We should call someone." Someone meant procedures, authorities, the right people. Someone trained to deal with unexpected variables. Eli heard them. He didn't react. He stayed exactly where he was, as if moving might undo the fragile permission holding him there. The blood on his sock had slowed, darkening, stiffening the fabric. He shifted his weight once, barely noticeable, jaw tightening against the sting. Daniel didn't answer either man. He was staring at the bracelet, not glancing, not studying. Staring. The leather looked different on a child's wrist. Smaller, more fragile. The cracks in it seemed deeper somehow. The mark burned into it rougher, less precise. It didn't belong in this place of clean lines and flawless finishes, and yet it did, because it existed, because it was real. The garage hummed faintly with residual engine heat. Somewhere above them, doors opened and closed. Conversations continued. Lives moved forward untouched by what was happening below. Down here. Time stalled. The bracelet pulled Daniel's focus inward, dragging his attention away from the rules he'd built his life on. He felt their weight pressing, and now every protocol, every safeguard designed to keep chaos out. This boy was chaos. Not loud, not destructive, just impossible to ignore. One of the guards shifted again. "Sir," he tried, firmer this time. "We really can't." Daniel lifted a hand. The motion was small, economical. Enough. The guard stopped mid-sentence. Ellie's eyes flicked to Daniel's hand, then back to his face, measuring, waiting. The boy didn't ask for permission. He didn't beg. He didn't explain. He stood there, bleeding quietly on polished concrete, wearing a symbol that did not belong to him yet somehow did. Daniel lowered his hand slowly, still didn't speak, because in that moment, this wasn't about security or policy or the kind of place this was supposed to be. It was about something far more dangerous. Recognition. And once that happens, no place, no matter how fortified, ever truly bends back to what it was before. Daniel crouched. He did it slowly, deliberately. The way you approach something skittish, not because it's weak, but because it's learned what happens when people move too fast. The concrete was cold through his trousers, the smell of oil sharper down here at eye level. For the first time in years, Daniel Halvorsen placed himself lower than someone else on purpose. "That leg," he said, keeping his voice level. Not soft, just human. "Who did that to you?" Eli followed the sound of his voice, not his eyes. His gaze stayed somewhere near Daniel's collarbone, close enough to listen, far enough to retreat if needed. He shrugged. It wasn't casual. It was practiced, shoulders lifting just enough to signal dismissal without inviting follow-up. The kind of movement kids learn when explanations only make things worse. "It's nothing." Daniel nodded, as if that answer made sense. He didn't reach for the wound, didn't call for ice, didn't ask again. Instead, he shifted his attention just slightly and pointed to the boy's wrist. "That," he said. "Where'd you get it?" Ellie's fingers twitched. The bracelet suddenly seemed heavier, as if the leather had remembered its weight. He rotated his wrist once, unconsciously trying to hide the mark, then stopped himself. Another shrug, smaller this time. The pause stretched, long enough for the garage to press in again, for the men behind Daniel to exchange glances, for someone to clear their throat and think better of it. Then Eli spoke. "My dad had one," he said. Not has, had. Before he stopped coming home. The words fell flat. No emphasis, no drama. Delivered the way you recite facts you've repeated often enough to dull their edges. Daniel stayed where he was. He didn't ask why. He didn't say "I'm sorry." He didn't interrupt the silence that followed. He waited. Ellie's jaw tightened. His breathing shifted, shallow for a moment, then deeper, as if his body was bracing for something his mind hadn't agreed to yet. "They said he owed money," Eli went on. "They said he ran." His voice wavered on the word ran, like it didn't quite fit. A breath. "Why, he didn't," Eli said. Faster now, the sentence trying to outrun the feeling. He just didn't come back. That was when his voice cracked out just once. Barely there. But it split something open all the same. Eli looked down at his shoe, at the darkened sock, at the smear of red he'd been pretending not to feel. His hand curled around the bracelet, thumb rubbing the burning mark as if checking it was still real. Today mattered. Daniel could feel it, even without being told. It mattered because some days carry weight whether you acknowledge them or not. Because some anniversaries don't announce themselves, they just sit heavier in your chest. Until breathing feels like work. Eli swallowed. I saw it this morning, he said. In a window. Not a store. A window. A pawn shop. By the bus stop. He lifted his wrist slightly now, no longer hiding it, showing it. It had the mark, he said. Same one. His eyes finally met Daniel's for the first time. Eli said quietly, "It didn't feel like a story people told me." The garage was silent again. Not the controlled silence of security systems and money, but the fragile kind that follows truth. The kind you don't rush through if you understand what it costs to reach it. Daniel stayed crouched. The billionaire. The brand builder. The man whose symbol now lived on a child's wrist like a question that refused to go unanswered. And in that moment, the brand stopped being an asset. It became something alive. Something that could bleed. Something that could be claimed or finally answered. Fourth moment broke not with a command, but with movement. Someone Daniel never saw, who stepped forward and placed a bottle of water into Ellie's hands. The plastic crinkled softly as the boy accepted it, fingers hesitant at first, then tightening. He didn't drink right away. He just held it, as if ownership itself required confirmation. Another guard lowered himself carefully to one knee. He didn't ask permission. He tore open a sterile cloth from a kit that appeared as if by instinct, and wrapped it gently around Ellie's shin. The fabric darkened almost immediately, but the pressure slowed the bleeding. The guard's hands were steady, familiar with damage, but not careless with it. Eli watched the whole thing without comment. His shoulders loosened by a fraction, not relief, something closer to disbelief. Behind them, the garage stirred. Phones buzzed once, then were silenced. Someone shifted their stance, recalibrating. The systems that governed this place were already trying to correct for the anomaly. An assistant leaned close to Daniel's shoulder, her voice low and tight. "Daniel," she said, not using his last name. "We can't keep him here." She wasn't wrong. The rules were clear. Children without authorization, injuries, unknown histories, unknown risks. Entire departments existed to prevent exactly this moment. This puts us in a position. She added quietly, "We should call." Daniel straightened. He rose to his full height, suit jacket falling back into place, the familiar weight of authority settling on him again. For an instant, everyone expected the correction, the call, the handoff, the restoration of order. But something had shifted. Daniel looked down at Eli. The boy had finally taken a sip of water. It dribbled a little at the corner of his mouth, wiped away quickly with the back of his hand. The bracelet rested against his wrist, damp now. The leather darkened by sweat. In time, Daniel saw not a liability, but a line drawn quietly, irrevocably between who he had been and who he could no longer pretend to be. This wasn't about optics. It wasn't about risk, management, or press statements, or the cost of doing the wrong thing quietly versus the right thing publicly. It wasn't about the brand he built or the distance he kept or the rules designed by men who had never learned to flinch at raised voices or walk without expecting pain. It was about a child who had walked into a place that didn't. Pendan stood anyway. Daniel turned just enough to face the room. "He stays," he said. The words were calm, even, unadorned. They didn't invite debate. For a moment, no one moved. A guard blinked. Another shifted his weight back. The assistant opened her mouth, then closed it again. Somewhere above them, an elevator chimed softly, oblivious. Daniel met each pair of eyes in turn. "This isn't a negotiation," he added, not louder, not sharper, just clearer. "And it's not temporary." The assistant exhaled slowly, recalculating. The guard who had wrapped Ellie's leg stood, stepped back, and nodded once. The driver closed the SUV door. Without being told, the system adjusted. Eli looked up at Daniel, confusion flickering across his face. Not fear, not hope, something more cautious. "You mean now?" he asked. Daniel crouched again, returning to eye level. "I mean, you don't have to leave," he said. "Not like this." Eli didn't smile, but he didn't step back either. In the silence that followed, procedures fell away. Titles blurred. What remained was simple and dangerous and human. A choice had been made, and once made, it couldn't be undone, not without costing something far greater than money. The garage did not bend, but Daniel Halvorsen did, and everything that followed would rise from that single, quiet act of refusal. By the end of the week, the rumors had already outrun the facts. They traveled the way rumors always do, unevenly, emotionally, picking up weight as they moved. A billionaire, a boy, a courtroom. No one agreed on the details, but everyone agreed it mattered. At Ellie's school, a black sedan appeared each morning just before the first bell. It wasn't polished to impress, no tinted arrogance, no entourage spilling onto the sidewalk. It simply pulled into the same curb space every day, engine idling, driver reading the paper. The door opened when Eli approached, closed quietly behind him. Parents noticed. Teachers noticed more. Kids noticed everything. Whispers threaded through hallways. Someone said Eli was rich now. Someone else said he'd done something bad. The truth, whatever. It was sat just out of reach, which made it irresistible. By Thursday, the principal called a meeting. The email was careful. Neutral language, disruptions, concerns, clarification. The office smelled like burnt coffee and lemon cleaner when the door opened. Daniel Halvorsen walked in alone. No lawyers, no assistants, no press. He shook the principal's hand, took the offered chair, and listened without interrupting as policies were recited. Safety, liability, perception. The unspoken fear of what happens when power enters places built to manage children, not influence. When it was his turn to speak, Daniel didn't raise his voice. He's here to learn, he said, and to heal. I'm not asking for exceptions. I'm asking for cooperation. The room went quiet. It wasn't intimidation that settled the matter. It was clarity. Later that afternoon, the boys responsible for Ellie's injuries were called in one by one. Parents present, counselors observing, records laid out plainly. There was no yelling, no threats. Just timelines, witnesses, medical notes, and the uncomfortable stillness of adults watching their children realize that silence doesn't always protect you. Consequences followed, measured, documented, final. By the weekend, the story had found its way somewhere else. A courtroom. Child Services requested a hearing. Standard procedure. Necessary oversight. The kind of room where futures pivot quietly. The judge ordered no cameras, no statements to the press. Still, the hallway filled. Daniel arrived early. Eli beside him. The boy wore a borrowed jacket that hung a little long in the sleeves. He kept his hands folded in his lap, bracelet visible now, not hidden, not displayed, just present. They sat in the front row. Together. Not as benefactor and recipient, not as witness and subject, as family. People noticed. When Daniel was asked formally, carefully why he was there, he stood. No speech prepared, no practiced sentiment. I'm not here because I'm obligated, he said, and I'm not here to contest the process. He glanced at Eli, then back to the bench. I'm here because someone showed up for me once, Daniel continued, at a moment when walking away would have been easier. His voice didn't break. I didn't know, he said, that I've been waiting to return the favor. The courtroom stayed quiet long after he sat down. No applause, no murmurs, just the sound of something settling into place. By Monday morning, the story was everywhere, though no one could agree on how it had leaked. A billionaire sitting beside a child. No press release, no photo op. Just presence. And for the first time in a long while, the world didn't argue about money or power or influence. It argued about something much harder to dismiss, what it means to show up. And what happens when you don single quotes T. Change didn't happen all at once. It never does. No matter how dramatic the beginning. It happened in early mornings when the city was still undecided about waking up. Daniel learned quickly that Eli rose before alarms, not out of discipline, but habit. Some days he'd already be dressed, backpack zipped, sitting at the kitchen counter swinging his legs, as if waiting for permission to exist. Breakfast was trial and error. The first lunches were wrong. Too much, too little. Food that looked healthy but came back untouched. Daniel noticed which things returned and which didn't. He adjusted without comment. Apples became slices. Sandwiches lost the crust without discussion. Juice boxes appeared, then disappeared when Eli admitted quietly that he hated them. Homework happened at a dining table meant for 12. They sat at opposite ends at first, distance pretending to be comfort. Over time, chairs crept closer. Pencils rolled across polished wood. Daniel relearned fractions he hadn't touched in decades, surprised by how grounding it felt to struggle with something so small and solvable. Some nights, Eli talked. Some nights, he did in single quotes. Daniel learned the difference between silence that asked for space and silence that asked to be shared. He respected both. The drinking stopped without ceremony. No announcement, no declaration. The bottles simply vanished, replaced by water glasses left half full on counters. Daniel slept more, woke clearer. He stopped losing entire evenings to numbness and started noticing how Eli hummed when he concentrated, how his foot tapped when he was nervous, how he relaxed only after checking that doors were locked not once, but twice. Eli stopped flinching, not all at once, not noticeably at first. It showed up in pauses that didn't end in recoil, in voices raised in frustration that didn't send him shrinking inward, in the way he learned that slammed doors could mean impatience instead of danger. The driver, Mark, was the first outsider to notice. Mark had been hired to navigate traffic, not feelings. But one night, when Daniel was late and Eli refused to sleep, Mark found himself sitting on the edge of the bed with a book he hadn't opened since his own kids were young. He stumbled through the first page. Got better by the second. By the third night, Eli asked if Mark would read again even if Daniel was home. He only moved sideways like that. Unexpected, unofficial. Some days were harder. Eli had nightmares that left him rigid and silent in the early hours, eyes open but seeing something else. Daniel learned not to rush those moments. He sat on the floor until Eli spoke, or until dawn made the shadows less convincing. School improved in inches, a hand raised once per week instead of never. A teacher's note about participation, a test, brought home face down, then flipped over with quiet pride. Daniel learned to celebrate without overwhelming praise, measured, specific, safe. They built rituals without naming them. Friday night walks, Sunday pancakes that burned the first batch every time. A rule about phones at dinner that Daniel broke more often than Eli did. Somewhere along the way, the house stopped feeling like a hotel. It accumulated mess. Shoes by the door, notes stuck to the fridge, a calendar with real handwriting on it. Healing didn't announce itself. It showed up in rides to school, in forgotten homework rescued just in time, in the absence of fear where fear used to live. And slowly, so slowly, it could only be seen in hindsight. Two lives stopped orbiting old damage and began moving forward. Not fixed, not finished, but no longer alone. At Ellie's graduation, the gym smelled like floor wax and cheap flowers, the kind of smell that never changes, no matter the school or the year. Folding chairs scraped against varnished wood. Programs rustled in nervous hands. A banner sagged slightly above the stage. Letters taped on by people who had learned to make celebration out of limited resources. Daniel sat in the front row, not because his name demanded it, because Eli had asked him to sit there. The bracelet was visible now. He no longer tucked it beneath a cuff or treated it like a relic that needed explanation. It rested against his wrist, worn smooth by time and habit, the mark catching the light when he shifted. Some parents noticed it. Most didn't. It wasn't meant for them. Eli waited with the other graduates, shoulders straighter than they'd been years ago, hands steady at his sides. The borrowed jacket fit now. He had grown into it in more ways than one. When his name was called, the applause was polite, uneven, honest. Eli walked to the microphone. He carried a card with him. Everyone did. It trembled slightly in his fingers as he unfolded it. Then, after a moment, he set it down. The gym quieted. Eli looked out over the room, eyes passing faces that had known him briefly, imperfectly, kindly, teachers, neighbors, people who had seen pieces of him and chosen not to look away. Then his gaze found Daniel. It held, not pleading, not unsure, anchored. I used to think family was something you lost, Eli said. His voice was steady, but there was a pause after the word lost, like it still carried weight. I thought it was like money, he continued, or houses, or jobs, something that could disappear if you weren't careful, or if you were. A soft ripple of understanding moved through the room. Eli swallowed. But it turns out, his fingers curled once against the edge of the podium. Family is the people who show up. Daniel felt the words hit not like a blow, but like recognition. Eli went on. Not the ones who promise, he said. Not the ones who explain why they can't. The ones who sit down when it's uncomfortable. The ones who stay when it would be easier to leave. He glanced down at the card, then back up again. shaking his head slightly as if amused by how unnecessary it suddenly seemed. I didn't know, Eli said quietly. That showing up could change everything. The room was completely still now. Daniel's hands rested in his lap. He realized distantly that he wasn't breathing the way he should be. His chest felt tight not with panic, but with something fuller, heavier. He remembered a garage that smelled of oil and concrete, a boy bleeding quietly on polished floors, a bracelet that didn't belong there but did. A moment when rules fell away and something truer took their place. Eli finished without flourish. Thank you, he said, for showing up. Applause broke out loud, sustained, messy. Parents stood. Teachers wiped their eyes. Someone cheered early, then laughed through tears. Daniel didn't clap. He couldn't. His vision blurred, the gym lights smearing into soft halos. He pressed his thumb against the bracelet at his wrist, grounding himself in its familiar texture. For the first time, the mark didn't feel like a legacy he had inherited. It felt like one he had earned. Eli stepped away from the microphone and ascended the stage. When their eyes met again, there was no ceremony in it. Just understanding. The kind that doesn't need to be spoken. The kind that shows up and stays later that night. The house was still. Not the tense stillness of waiting rooms or court halls, but the settled quiet that follows a day that has taken everything out of you and given something back in return. Outside, the city softened. Traffic thinned. Windows across the street went dark one by one. Eli sat on the edge of his bed. Graduation program folded carefully beside him like something fragile. He was still wearing the shirt from the ceremony, collar loosened, sleeves rolled up. The room smelled faintly of laundry soap and the cheap flowers someone had pressed into his hands earlier that day. Daniel knocked once before entering. He carried a small box, plain, no logo, no weight to it at all, except what it meant. He sat beside Eli, close enough now that it didn't feel like crossing a line. I'd have something for you, Daniel said. Eli didn't ask what it was. He didn't rush. He had learned slowly that good things didn't disappear just because you waited a moment before touching them. Daniel placed the box between them and opened it. Inside was a leather band. New, but not polished. The leather was thick, treated, meant to soften with time rather than crack under it. Burned into its surface was the same mark, the brand. Clean lines, deep enough to last. Not a replica, not a replacement. A continuation. Eli picked it up carefully. He ran his thumb over the mark, then along the inside, where a date had been pressed. Not the day Daniel had given it to him, but the day everything had changed. The day a garage stopped being just a place and became a turning point. It's not better than the old one, Daniel said, anticipating the hesitation. It's just meant for what comes next. Eli nodded. He slid the band onto his wrist, just above the old one. The leather fit perfectly, snug without being tight, grounded in a way he hadn't expected. He flexed his fingers once, then again, and then he smiled. Not wide, not performative. The kind of smile that arrives when something finally rests where it belongs. They didn't talk much after that. They didn't need to. Daniel stood to leave, then paused at the door. I'm proud of you, he said, not for the speech, not for the ceremony, just for being. Eli didn't say thank you. He didn't have to. Later, after the lights were off and the house settled again, Daniel stood alone in the hallway for a long moment. He looked down at his own wrist, at the bracelet he had worn for years without understanding what it demanded of him. He understood now. Symbols only matter if you live up to them. Brands only mean something if they stand for more than success. Family isn't proven by blood or wealth or promises made in easier moments. Is proven by presence. By staying when it costs you something. By showing up again and again without knowing how the story ends. So here's the question that remains long after the room goes quiet. What would you do if a child asked you for help? Would you look away and call it responsibility? Would you hand it off and call it procedure? Or would you stop, bend, and let the moment change you? You don't need money. You don't need power. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be someone who shows up and stays.